Welcome to Skyline6 Summer Vacation multiplayer collaboration in Cities Skylines. Things are really starting to heat up, if you know what I mean. Hey everybody, Mike from Xucaboa here, with what might be my most ambitious build I've ever attempted in my entire life. We've finished our first round with the crew and most of the guest builders. Now we'll wrap up with the crew and a returning guest from Season 1. Everyone in this project is a supremely talented city builder, so be sure to not only catch up on the playlist, but subscribe to their channels to see what unique creative influences are shaping this city so far. New episodes premiere every Sunday on each builder's channel, so do not miss out on the hottest collab project of the season. Wait, what the? Ay, caramba. Did you know during my first Skyline 6 premiere, I was on my own summer vacation? I've been traveling around summer destinations near and far to try to find inspiration for my next project.
Okay, so every time I'm visiting beaches like this, I'm thinking of Skyline 6. This is Skyline 6.
But on the day of the premiere, I had visited the Alhambra, and I knew that I had to try it. Hold on to your butts while I attempt to build the most visited monument in Spain piece by piece, as close to a real-life one-to-one as possible, in what may be a CS-CK3 Paradox Games crossover, the likes of which the world has never before seen. After the build, I'll discuss the methods, the mod limitations, a tour of the real Alhambra, and our own Skyline 6 lore chronicling the epic contest for control between competing kingdoms. Okay, yalla. So this was my attempt to do a one-to-one replica of the Alhambra in Granada, Spain. And I'm calling it the Alradko because I have a great buddy of mine in the Cities Skylines community, Teddy Radko, who often does builds using vanilla assets just like this. Maybe, I don't think he's ever built the Alhambra, but, you know, this is very much something he would give a shot. If I was building something like this, would probably not choose to do it with vanilla assets. I would use mods like procedural objects and many other ones that I didn't have. This series, when we started it, was right after the last update, and so to make sure that our save game never got ruined, passing it between 10 people, we kept our mod list extremely light, and really the only 3 mods used to build this were Find It, Move It, and Ploppable Rico. Right? Find It and Move It, obviously, are to find and move stuff, and then Ploppable Rico allows me to put buildings without zoning in certain places, which is necessary, and you'll see why. So I spent like 25 hours a day for the last week making that sequence. That was way more challenging than I thought, and took way more time to render and all kinds of problems. So I'm going to do this flyover a little bit faster. I'm not going to edit it in any real way, but I'll do my best to talk about what's going on here. In our fictional world, where this is competing with the Fort NotKnox over on this peninsula with Lord NotKnox. Here we have Sultana Isaura on the peninsula that was conquered by Captain Achfius in the year 711. So this peninsula is called Gibravius, and on it we are building the Alradko for the Isaurid dynasty. In real life, the Alhambra is not on the sea, so that's the first inaccuracy, obviously, but this peninsula, to be honest, was perfectly shaped for it. I couldn't believe it. It was like it was meant for it. Even a lot of the bumps were exactly where the towers or the gates needed to be. I did very minimal terrain work, which is, I don't know, I love terrain work. It's kind of sad I didn't get to do that much, but using the pillars in a certain way enabled me to create the effect of having various layers of terrain too. The pillars and the networks, you see I have these park paths, Park Life DLC paths, change the terrain with them when you move them, so if you just adjust the nodes it can knock down some pretty fine changes in terrain that maybe the landscaping tool couldn't pull off the same way. This part is, okay, I'm going to start talking about the build now. This is the Alcazaba in Spanish pronunciation. This is the fortress, the oldest part of the real Alhambra, and it is also where I started this build project. Now, the sequence I had just shown is not necessarily in the order in which I built this project, right? It took a lot of, I was all over the place, but there's no way I could have recorded all of that. It was 12 hours a day for a week straight. No way I could make a video out of that, so we'll just talk about it. Here, I have reimagined something. This is a little bit of a deviation from reality. This, in real life, are ruins. They're excavated ruins of where the garrison had been for the troops. I wanted something a little bit more interesting than ruins, at least in this part, so I put in these bunker buildings and stacked them in a way that they kind of look like buildings. And I actually snuck in a lot of houses all over the place. Here, I was a little sloppy. You can see the corner of these little one-by-one houses peeking through, but in here, there's like a lot of people that live in these in the game. So that's working. That's giving the effect of people coming in and out. It's really great. I added doorways using the other type of bunker, the one with the machine, or the large gun, rather, turret on it. So that has a great doorway on it that you can sneak inside of the pillars to create the effect of a doorway. Here I use these props to imitate stables, I guess, and I put a little well. But this was my imagination. I don't know if that's real. Now, in real life, the arches are here into the wall. They're kind of carved out, and you can see that it looks like there was probably another story, another floor above this where these arches line up, and then one on top of the arches covering this up. It's possible that this was enclosed. I don't know for sure. I'm not a true historian. I'm just really interested in things, so I do my best to look it up on the internet and see what I can find. So I didn't find anything about that, but I left it open because this is what anyone who looks up the Alhambra today will be familiar with, is this open complex. Something I did try really hard to do was to get every single tree to be exactly accurate, but with hedges and other props that aren't Even with trees, too. I don't have prop control or tree control, so I can't put them wherever I want. So sometimes I had to make some sacrifices in that regard. But over here, I've got the rampart walls, got them animated with people going through them because of tourist walking paths. Those were a great help in getting people to go where there's not actually a true building hidden inside, like those houses. So over here, a little bit of an anachronism, but we got the taco trucks because you got to have some tacos. Always important. But this is a plaza in real life. This does kind of look just like this. And yeah, it's kind of empty right down here. I'm not totally sure why. I think it's being excavated or something like that. Over here, there are excavated ruins in the Meshwar. And this is pretty faithful to the real layout of the ruins. I just took a liberty with imagining, just like I did with the houses for the troops, that there was still a minaret here. This square exists, but it's the base of where a minaret had been. And so I added a ritual washing pool and a little gazebo here where there's another square where there had been. I believe, I understood it was some part of a mosque or other religious type of spot. So I put those in just because I thought it really added some dynamic layers to the otherwise, empty place right here. From a certain level, there's, you got this now, and it adds a big layer change in the building size. But these paths were fun to manipulate and get to create different heights. Now, if I was using procedural objects, I would use an asset here to kind of cover this up as like a slab, as like a big flat movable decal. But I don't have that, so I had to use network paths. And so sometimes you see light posts sticking out of things. There's nothing I can do about that. But here, yeah, these aren't connected to anything. They just are there to create terrain where it otherwise would want to sink down. This patio, as we're going into the Nasrid palaces in real life, we'll call them the Isaurid palaces here in the game. But I think it's pretty close. This park asset did a good job for the interior of the patio, and then I got a little creative with these pillars, the pedestrian pillars here, creating this arched effect because they in real life they're made out of hedges, and I can't stack hedges without prop control, without any type of anarchy mod. So that was really important. To get the effect, I used those, and I think it came out pretty good. I did use monorail tracks without pylons to create these windows by putting the nodes very close together and then stacking them vertically, and also in places I use them for stairs, I use them for roofs. So this was, my way of. They're useful, but I wanted to be thoughtful about where I put them because they can affect the terrain too, especially when I'm dealing with such subtle changes of terrain. It could really mess it up if I put them too low or something. Because they are a network. Here we have the Court of the Myrtles in real life. This is a reflection pool. You start to enter the Nasrid palaces through this way and check it out, and then you go into the Tower of the Comares and the Hall of the Ambassadors. I can't overstate just how influential, maybe influential is the wrong word, but how important and significant some of the events that happened in this building were for all of world history, and probably everyone who's watching this personal life is different because of a few key decisions that were made right in here. Namely, the Alhambra decree in 1492, which expelled all of the Jews from Iberia and sent them to the Ottoman Empire and North Africa, and then to Portugal, who then the Portuguese Jews were expelled a few years later and sent to the Netherlands. And that's really changed just the Jewish history of the world in such a way that it can't be overstated. This was a devastating thing that happened in here by the Catholic monarchs when they had conquered it in that same year in January of 1492. The other thing was Christopher Columbus, right? It was that same year, 1492, after they conquered Granada, after the monarchs got their hands on this palace. They were like, yo, Christopher, go sail. And he's like, all right. And that obviously has such a massive implication on the way the history of the world has been shaped. It's incomprehensible how many things would be different if that hadn't happened the way it did. So, but anyway, getting out of the history, this is the Court of the Lions in real life. And here I used dragon props instead of lions. In real life, the fountain has lions going around it, and that's what gives its name. But we don't have lions, we have dragons. So I made it the Court of the Dragons. And I couldn't really do archwork at this scale like I had done. This is about as small as an arch, either this type or this type. These are still a little bit too big for in here. So I used these monorail props, and this was really tricky to get them this tight and this close to networks and decals, and everything here is so finely positioned that if I were to sneeze, it would just get totally out of whack. So now the inside of the palace complex, the Isaura Dynasty palaces, is so geometrically elaborate. It is breathtaking. It is one of the most magnificent things I've ever seen in my entire life. And there's no words I can use right now to really describe it beyond that. So here, the floor is not this elaborate. It's actually quite plain. But to represent the interior, which I cannot build in Cities Skylines, right? This is just the exterior we're seeing. I tessellated these parking space decals, and as best I could to do a somewhat Moorish geometry here. There were a lot of designs I was experimenting with, and I thought this one worked the best for this space. But they were all pretty cool, messing around with these. You can see sometimes they misalign, and that's because of like some secret pixel grid in the map is at a certain orientation that I can't quite see, and because this is totally squared, it's not totally squared with that grid of pixels in the game. So when I could rotate this and they would align if I get it to line up exactly with the pixel grid, but I can't see it, and it's not where my building is. So sometimes you get these ones that are just off by a hair, and that's what I could do. But it gives the effect. I'm really proud of how that came out. These buildings over here, not too much to talk about right now without getting into real life history and things, but from the exterior there are trees like this sticking out of them in these little courtyards, these large. Here I use the boreal pine, but I think they're cypress trees in real life, or junipers or something like that, one of those tall skinny trees. So I use those wherever they were, and there's quite a few. Here I used this is where we start getting into the geometric gardens. I used a 6-pointed star, but in real life there's an 8-pointed star, but this is the smallest I could get that looked good with an 8-pointed star that's like in there. So it's really a star like this. I used a 6-pointed star because it fit better, but there are 6-pointed stars like these 3 right here are really there in the real Alhambra. So I put them in and did my best to make it accurate, right? That's was a huge goal, was to be as accurate as possible, despite the extreme amount of limitations I have doing this. Here we have the palace, the Portal Palace, which is a really cool spot with a large reflection pool outside. The thing I kind of regret now that I hadn't done is put in a like scenic viewpoint out here, because that is kind of why it's called the Portal Palace. It has to do with portico and portal, said in Arabic, right? It just means like the viewpoint, the scenic view. But I thought I made a decision in the moment. I thought it looked kind of strange with the gravel bridge, covered bridge network asset that I'm using to create the roofs. It just didn't look quite right if I didn't have a wall. So I did that. That was but maybe I could have figured out something better. I don't know. I'd have to give it another try. I only had 6 days to do this. This was not easy. So that's something maybe if I had more time I would try to do better. These gardens are pretty accurate in terms of layout, although the shapes inside are I made based on the prop things I could do. The real ones are much finer, much more elaborate. But the trees are pretty close to what's really there. I think I did a great job with the trees, the realism with the trees. This one star is not here, but I wanted to use it because I didn't use it over there. So a real challenge with the gardens were to get it to be terraced very, very finely, and you can see there is a change in terrain going up and up and up, but it's so subtle. City Skylines, it's very hard to get that degree of subtlety visually represented quite well. So I did my best using these garden. There are these these 8 rather rectangular kind of shapes here, and I filled it with these flower beds that help create the effect that they're at different terrains, because they're not terrain conforming like the hedges. So they stay flat. If they're just a little bit higher, then they're at a different height, which is good. It really helped. Over here, I really was killing myself to try to do something as elaborate as the stuff that's here, and in the end, I opted to use these assets because I just can't, with the limitations I have, do the fine work that's here in real life. But these are quite representative. I think they give the idea of what is there, right? You have terraced things with lots of flowers and all kinds of stuff. So that was really cool. And luckily, there's this one pillar here, even though it has these kind of bricks on top. It color matches this asset a lot better than the others. So I'm glad that existed. And I even took the opportunity to make a little geometric shape in the nub right there when I can. I was, that sort of thing I was really trying to be conscious of when I was building. Now, this garden is something I just made up out of nowhere. And that's because this is not actually the full Alhambra. The full Alhambra would probably go almost to El Demetrius's build. So I chopped it off kind of maybe at 40% or so. Because everything that's here is like the business end. Everything over here is just more repetition of what we get in the backside. I mean, that's an understatement, but the idea is conveyed here, and then I don't have to mess around with the volcano too much. I just couldn't scale it to do the full size. So by doing that, because it actually curves a little bit here, because this ended up being straight, these rectangular ones, I had this triangular shape. Because the curve kind of follows where this asset is. And so what I did is I made a vanilla ice cream cone. I think it looks like a vanilla ice cream cone. And that's because, as you know, I'm very into the vanilla scene. Playing vanilla is something that has really trained me to come up with really creative ways to do stuff. I'm always learning something new just in the vanilla game. There's so much to do in Cities Skylines 1. I'm kind of sad in a way Cities Skylines 2 is coming out, because I'm not done yet. I've got so much left to do. So that was my vanilla contribution to the game. Even though this is a modded build, I'm only using 3 mods really. Find It, Move It, and Ploppable Rico are the only mods that make this build possible. I don't have any other mods. So still quite challenging, still required a lot of brainstorming, problem solving, things like that. This aqueduct is much beefier than the one that exists in real life, but I think it just looks cooler. The one in real life is pretty subtle. You might not notice it. So I wanted to, if I'm going to have an aqueduct, I want it to be an aqueduct. And now, we're going into a volcano, so now we're kind of outside of the realm of reality here. Over here, this is the mosque, the Grand Mosque of Alhambra, and this doesn't exist anymore. Now there's a church, because this fortress was conquered by Catholic monarchs of Spain, and they removed all the mosques, obviously. So this was turned into a church, and then that was destroyed, and then a new church was built anyway. So the church that's there now is relatively new. I wanted to put in a mosque because we already have a church on the other side. We have that. One of the coolest assets in the game is this large cathedral. It's so ornate and elaborate. So I wanted to be a little bit. If this is going to be the Alhambra, let's put a mosque in it. So I kept the mosque. There's no images that I could find, at least, of what it had looked like. So I looked up medieval mosques. I found that they almost always have the dome in the middle and the 4 minarets on either side, very large minarets. So I went with that. I thought it was a good attempt at creating a mosque. Anyone is free to leave a comment and tell me if they think something about this isn't super mosque-y. I don't know. Or if they know more about the real history of the mosque. I'd love to find out. I just did my best here. I like that there were the courtyards inside. The oppression office is what I used as the base for the dome. And then I put some assets all around it. to create the rest of the building, including these little commercial buildings from the Africa, to create these arches from the Africa DLC. Right next to it, I have the hammam, the baths, and ritual washing place for before going into the mosque. These exist now as ruins, and I did use the real sauna asset to put it, but it was not because it's a sauna, because it had these low chimneys with the smoke, and I thought that was, they'd probably have that. So I thought it was good base to build on, and I added the washing pools and things like that. But the real life ones now don't work. They're just ruins. But you can go inside. You can see the layout and everything. These buildings here and these buildings here do kind of exist in real life. I had to kind of improvise a little bit with the arrangement of everything, but I chose them for their roofs. The roof of each of the buildings here is similar enough to the palace roofs. You don't really have the terracotta type of tiling you might expect in like Spanish architecture. I'm not totally sure why that is. It is the Sierra Nevada. It gets snowy there, so it's maybe not ideal to have terracotta in a place that gets snow with some frequency. But the if you look at the facade of these houses, I didn't do too much because you really have to get to street level to see that it's like just some American looking university town houses. But a lot of them come with the fruit trees, which I thought was a great touch. Here there are excavated ruins, and this was fun because they're like in different levels. There's lots of terrain stuff going here. So I used the trench network and the park path network to create this effect of having like these excavated ruins going down a little bit deeper than the others. And then over here, this doesn't really exist like it did. This, in the Alhambra, they call this area the Medina, which means the town. There had been a town inside of the fortress, inside of the complex, rather. So there for a long time there had been a large Jewish population, and I wanted to represent that. Since we have a church on the other side, we have a mosque over here, I wanted to put a little Jewish community with a synagogue right here. And it got some marketplaces. It's not like, I don't think it would have been a closed Jewish quarter like you find in Catholic Spain after the Alhambra, right? But I added just a little wall next to it just in case, right? To give the idea that this is a little bit separate from the rest. I think during most of the Nasrid times, they were pretty well integrated. The Jews and Muslims were living side by side, working together. It was a pretty cool, idyllic place until, of course, it had its medieval drama and factions and all kinds of court intrigue and assassinations and really interesting stuff. But that was my contribution to creating a diverse, multicultural, historic palace. I missed this. This is the Gate of the Olives. So it's a cool gate. It has this little building right next to it, so I put it in with these houses. They fit well. And you can see here with this house, it's got the hedge, the kind of boring vanilla hedge, and then over here, right next to it, I've got the nicer hedge. So that, I chose to use these hedges wherever I put down a hedge instead of these ones. But those have a place too. They create more of a wall than these. These have the little bush stems, trunks, whatever you'd call it. So that's that. Anyway, I think I've been talking long enough. As you can see, I've added a monorail track connection, and I guess I can just really quickly talk about, we'll get into the lore a little bit, but here I put some chutes going off the side of the volcano into the sea, where ships are ready to collect all the lava chunks that solidify inside the little bay here. I don't know, I was getting silly. But I think it'll be good for our little story, which we'll get into right now. But first, let me share a major update about a project near and dear to my heart. Last year, I began work on OXG, the history of Xucaboa, starting all the way back with nomadic hunter-gatherers in a modified Roslyn Peninsula map. Now, I've updated the map by fusing Roslyn with a real-life Lisbon, Portugal height map. I'll be starting from the Bronze Age, but Teddy Radko has been working with me behind the scenes for a few months now to create an epic modern network for anyone who wants to play in the current time. Using his manipulation of vanilla assets means that this map requires no custom assets and only mass transit DLC to open and enjoy, Thank you very much to Larry Skylines, No Mercy, and Shake Styles for their help in making this happen as well. Stay tuned for updates on a project that will span the ages. Now back to our Skyline6 lore to wrap up the video. The strategic peninsula was first conquered by Captain Achvius, which is why to this day it is known as Jabravius. Sultana Isaura, Her Majesty of Vanilla, cemented her legacy by establishing these palaces for her dynasty. She was succeeded by Riki Sultan of the Consul clan, and he built this large palace in the center. However, on the other side of the map, Lord NotKnox continued his rivalry with the Isaurids over who would reign supreme over the bay. Many raids were launched in both directions, but it remained a stalemate. One day, they both realized the volcano was looking like it might just destroy the entire map. So, they decided to put their differences aside and use all of their brightest minds in each of their kingdoms to come up with some kind of pressure release bypass valve that sends the lava into these chutes where it goes into the sea. Because that's how volcanoes work, I think. I don't know, sounds legit. Now the lava is collected by ships offshore that put it in this nice little barge. The mission was so successful and the sale of all the lava chunks was so profitable that a long-lasting peace has reigned and made everybody very happy. And with the volcano technology in place, now there is room for further development in this side of our map. Don't forget, next Sunday is Raid Kitty's turn. Be sure to check the playlist, subscribe to everybody, and don't miss out on Skyline6 Summer Vacation.